Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion on future of procurement in the age of generative AI. I'm Satyan Pathak, Managing Director of India for Procurability, and joining me is Philip Peitson, co-founder and Managing Director at AOP. Philip, welcome.
Satyan, thank you
Uh,
so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to be on the live stream with you today.
Pleasure, always. Together, both of us will explore the exciting world of GenAI in procurement. But before we dive in, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box throughout our chat, and we'll do our best to answer. So let's jump in. Uh, Philip, one of the key questions I'm always asked by both my stakeholders as well as my own team is, you know, how core is GenAI going to be to procurement digital strategy or even
Mhm.
procurement's overall strategy?
Yeah.
In other words, should it be another technology in digital arsenal of procurement group, or is it going to be like front and center? What's your thought?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's based on my experience so far, at least, it's actually a little bit of both. It's in one hand, it's just another technology. On another hand, when you kind of take a little step back and look longer term, it's going to be core in my mind to procurement strategy and procurement operating models. And, I look at generative AI right now through two different lenses. So one is there's ad hoc usage, and two is more embedded usage. So when I mean ad hoc usage, when I survey CPOs today, and we do it at events, we do it during webinars, we do it, one-on-one, overwhelmingly, them and their teams today using Gen AI on what I would say an ad hoc basis. So that is, they have access to an enterprise
Yeah.
license for ChatGPT or for Copilot or Gemini or whatever the tool is that they're using. And they've kind of given their teams access to it to figure out, use it when you think it'll be useful. And so there's a lot of experimentation going on. But on the other hand, there is also the embedded AI, which is where you're buying technologies that are either AI first technologies or the technologies that have really got AI and generative AI deeply embedded into them. So that's absolutely the future. And there's a lot of tools already in the market that are starting to do that. But I think that, to answer kind of the first question, it's both ad hoc usage, which is just another technology, but it's also really going to be core to how we think about the procurement operating model. What do you think? What do you see from your position?
Yeah, I think honestly, I mean, if you take the whole cohort of Gen AI, traditional AI, and agentic AI, I think
Mhm.
that's starting to become absolute core to. I would even hazard a guess and say procurement strategy, not just digital strategy, because
Yeah.
it's changing pretty much everything: the operating model, the people model, the delivery model, the savings, the effectiveness, efficiency. It's touching every aspect of it, and that's going to continue. So I think if you're a CPO, I think you just don't have. I don't think you have a choice but to make it absolutely core to your digital strategy.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on that, and it's an exciting time. I think that
Yeah.
for a lot of us that have been in procurement for a long, long time, and we always talk about, well, procurement doesn't really change that fast. We're slow adopters and things like that. Well, we don't have a choice anymore, and it's exciting because now we can start to think about doing things that weren't even possible before.
Absolutely, and I think the key here will be probably tempering the hype with
Yeah.
pragmatism, and that's
Hmm.
that's that's what will be key to the strategy. And again, we'll talk more about
Yeah.
the approach towards that. But I think I just want to kind of move forward and say, okay, now, okay, if this is front and center and this is core to the strategy,
Yeah.
what are the real life examples we have seen, in the procurement world, where have been the successful implementations? Why don't you start, and then we'll continue to build on that.
Yeah, I think of this as there are tactical uses of generative AI. So what I mean is, very specific and task oriented. So, for example, co-pilots for contracting and redlining. Looking in contracts where risks are, looking for proposing fallback language, pulling out obligations into, what do we need to track in a contract as we put a contract into place. So that's pretty tactical, because it's related to a specific task that we can do. But also, I look at and there's things like autonomous negotiations is another. Using agentic AI to negotiate payment terms at scale. as an example, where just it takes a lot of the communications out that the human would have to do. That's not really scalable because of the thousands of suppliers that we're often dealing with. What I'm really interested in is kind of sitting above that is when you look at things like orchestration. So that
Yeah.
for me, something like procurement orchestration enables us to rethink the operating model. And that's really interesting, and probably the most exciting for me is thinking about, as you're starting to bring together workflow tools, process automation, and and generative AI all into one, where you can really start to provide a different experience for people who want to buy stuff within the business. I want to talk a little bit more about that in detail later, but for me, that's a game changer and something that I'm seeing a lot of organizations embrace. But what are you seeing?
Absolutely. I think that whole intake and orchestration space is getting completely revolutionized with
Yeah,
not just Gen AI, but AI as well, right?
yeah,
Another thing I'm seeing is the whole category management or category strategy. Because, as we know, when the whole procurement automation tools and platforms came in, they pretty much hogged the space downstream, P2P,
hmm
and maybe source to contract. But with this AI and Gen AI, actually, there are really best of the breed tools that are coming in to manage the category management, particularly category strategy. And this is where I think there's a nice marriage between traditional AI and Gen AI, where you have analytical foundation that can be done by traditional AI, but then
yeah,
there are really good tools out there which are taking care of category strategy and recommendations coming from the Gen AI capabilities, where you have established practices and established category strategies across multiple categories, and then the tools, and then there is a possibility of Gen AI recommending something really innovative which has not been tried in that category, and then saying, okay, hey, this is a possibility, and then obviously category managers taking the final call. So this is really exciting, and especially those creative or innovative judgment based processes where traditionally the solutions have really not worked that well.
yeah. And I think because the vast majority of my experience has definitely been upstream, so I think about the sourcing process, but the category management process a lot. And you think about something that has historically been difficult for procurement is market intelligence, getting really
Absolutely.
good, trustworthy, deep, and contextualized market intelligence. And so I'm really interested to see how we evolve from a generative AI perspective in bringing in all this data from various different sources. And the data can be around market conditions, it can be around risk, it marries with your internal demand levers, and kind of puts all this information into the big box, if you will, and starts to generate some ideas. And I don't think that it's necessary that Gen AI will say this is the strategy you should pursue, but these are some of the things that, based on all this information, you should be thinking about, because that's where the human then is doing the interpretation of some of that insights and analytical capabilities of generative AI and turning it into something that's practicable.
Yep, yep. And that's a great another segue, which is risk management, I mean, especially the supplier risk and supply chain risk. And again, it's tied to category strategy, but it's also an independent one where, and we worked with our AI partner, and we were able to enable something called Resilience Hub, which is really a fairly next breed risk management solution, and that could have not been possible without help of Gen AI, where we are able to now, because there is just so much of information out there, and filtering it out, getting the relevant information, and creating actionable insights out of that. That's really been getting enabled through Gen AI, and we're now able to have some really strong, predictable forecast predictions as well as predictive insights in terms of supply chain strategies, in terms of inventory, in terms of demand forecast. So it's really powerful in those spaces where you don't need to you don't want to just understand the pattern,
Yeah.
but really forecast them and almost create some kind of pattern
Do you see
in the future.
do you see something in the you talked about being predictive from a risk management, but in scenario planning, that's something that I think that we've struggled with from a risk perspective, is to
Yeah.
okay, so say, well, what if this changes? what's the effect of that going to be on my supply chain, and what are some of the things I need to be aware of? And I've not really seen technology do that at scale well yet. And I've often looked at that as being a big kind of um, it impedes our ability to be a true risk partner for the business.
Yeah.
Do you see real world examples of that yet, or is that something that we kind of got to look on the horizon for?
We are starting to see the real life examples in
Yeah,
that. And as I was saying that, there is just tremendous power of combining traditional and Gen AI and creating predictive insights in both, as I said, the risk factor, the news alerts, the web
yeah.
crawling, and identifying the key insights and filtering it out based on the priority and gravity of it. All of that together, obviously, you can generalize it at market intelligence, but overall, on the risk management front, there is a significant potential there, and I think there are again best of the breed solutions that are
Mhm.
exploiting that, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that as well.
Yeah. Now, I do just want to remind anyone who's watching in, please do feel free to put questions in the chat. We will come back to those and really answer anything that we can, post this live stream. But I wanted to just ask you a little bit about implementations. I think that an implementation of a generative AI tool is not necessarily. It has some similar traits to implementation of what I would call more regular technology, but there are also differences. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing specifically in the implementation of Gen AI, and perhaps some ways that you're seeing that you're helping clients, but you're also seeing other clients overcome those?
Yeah, great question. I think this is where I know any emerging technology, as it goes through the so-called hype cycle. I think this is really the critical juncture because this can really decide the success or failure of that
Yeah.
new technology. So I think, my personal opinion, Gen AI wise, we are at that juncture where the implementation is really critical because the areas where the true potential exists are fairly starting to mature. We now know where there is a strong potential, but now the key is in ensuring robust implementation. And we work with multiple clients on AI opportunities, both traditional Gen AI and agentic. And I would say couple of things pop to mind. First and foremost is, I think, managing the expectations. you
Yeah.
know when ChatGPT launched and everything felt magical, I think people have been so enamored with Gen AI. I think
Mhm.
there has been this whole movement towards almost over enthusiasm about power of Gen AI, and Gen AI being the solution for everything. I think it's starting to kind of temper down and people are becoming more pragmatic, but I think that's probably the number one implementation challenge that we have seen, that the expectation are so much and sometimes unrealistic that at the design stage itself or even before implementation, it start kind of almost is set to fail. So
Yeah.
being pragmatic, uh, knowing that Gen AI is not the solution for everything, combining traditional AI and Gen AI, where depending on the demand of the problem and the need of the problem, and also not forgetting the human intelligence. Combining all these is, I think, the number one implementation best practice or challenge. I would say that
Mhm.
remember that it's not that that's the only solution that exists in the market, and making sure that you're implementing the right solution and combination of right solutions.
Yeah.
Second thing is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think the second thing is business case. That's
Mhm.
been one big thing that we are seeing, and now many of the situations we are starting to become really critical about building the business case. And what we are now starting to see is, okay, it started as significant cost savings or efficiency oriented play, but it's starting to become so much more,
Mhm.
especially with generative AI, that it's entering effectiveness fields like sourcing savings, innovative category strategies, as I said, risk management. It's also entering compliance space, like contract management solutions. They are driving better compliance. The risk management solutions, they are also doing risk management as well as compliance management. Ensuring that the business case is comprehensive, well-rounded, I think is the second thing in terms of implementing, because that will manage the stakeholder
Yeah.
resistance. That will make sure the commercially it's viable and it's not just the hype.
Yeah, the business.
And third thing, I
No,
would
please,
just
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, let me jump in at the end.
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
saying that only the third thing. Yeah, thanks for that. And I think the third thing is obviously the resistance to change, and that's
Yeah.
true for anything, but it's more so for this one. And that's kind of a combination of unproven business cases, hype, perspective about hype or a perception of a hype, and then obviously this whole fear of becoming redundant. I think that's combination of all of that drives a lot of resistance to change. And obviously, it kind of sometimes is masked as a data privacy concerns or data security concerns, but broadly, I think I would say resistance to change is the third big one that I'm seeing.
No,
What do you
I'm
think?
definitely. I see the resistance to change. I want to talk about that a little bit more detail in a moment. When I think about business case, it's an interesting one because, we're probably all a little scarred from past implementations of technology where business cases were possibly overhyped. And so I think it's really important at the moment to under-promise and over-deliver as much as you can. Be conservative in building your business cases, because and it goes to the change management a little bit. There's a huge contingent of folks within an organization who want it to fail. And they want it to fail, an implementation to fail, because they fear, the path that this is leading us to, and to jobs. And so, you build business cases based on aggressive numbers, and you don't hit them, then that'll be remembered by a lot of people for a long time. I also see that the smaller that you can define a use case, the better. Test first of all, have a really specific use case, a specific goal in mind that you may not need to build a really big complex business case for, because you're not making a big investment up front, and then you can use that to scale further. You can demonstrate this is the power that was actually created by using generative AI in a small kind of test environment, if you will. So it gives people a lot more confidence to go and invest further, because some of the ROI numbers that I hear and talk to CPOs that they've achieved, vary wildly. And it's not necessarily because of the core underlying technology. It's just because of the use case or how, their organizations have embraced change. And a lot of it at the moment, I think, is still being driven by efficiency. Like that's the mindset I think that folks are in terms of using generative AI, is how much work is it going to help me save and to overcome, the problem of doing more with less. But what's important is, okay, what are you going to do with that time, that is saved from people's roles? And if you don't capture that, this is very similar to, the outsourcing conversations that we all had, 15 years ago. It's all well and good, replacing part of somebody's role with something else, whether that is an employee in another country or whether it's technology. But if you don't actually then take advantage of the time that you have, that you've saved, are you really getting an ROI anyway? After all, so some things just to be really careful in consideration about.
Yeah, and just to build on that, and probably another aspect that comes to mind, Phil, is that procurement always had this challenge of trying to be perceived by rest of the functions as to be strategic, and trying to get the table at the table at the strategic level. And I'm just thinking, how does this change that, in terms of user delight, in terms of user acceptance, in terms of stakeholder insights? What do you think?
That one, we go back to something we said earlier about procurement orchestration. And the idea of having a front door for procurement. It's an intake. So essentially, it's intake and the promise that we've always talked about guided buying for a long time that was never really a true reality. I think that a lot of the intake and orchestration platforms now allow you to have a front door for procurement, which then guides people to the right place based on what they're buying. I think that's really big for the experience. I always talk to people about the perception of procurement is driven based on how difficult we make it to buy the smallest thing. how hard do we make it to buy some stationery? And if we make it hard to buy stationery, then that's the perception that procurement is difficult to work with. So as easy as we can make it for people to buy the majority if they want through these technologies, it can only help the perception of procurement and have people trust us with their most strategic suppliers and budgets and things like that. And this is a huge part of it. Also the data. You think about how many times we go in front of a stakeholder with spend analytics that are not necessarily reflective of reality. We missed something, or they're old, and you put them in front of a stakeholder, and the stakeholder immediately looks at them and says, "Well, that's wrong." And again, they're looking for holes to poke so that they don't have to work with procurement. And sometimes we make it easy. So being able to kind of have a lot more open, transparent discussions around data sources and where this information and insight comes from, and challenging it collectively, I think is also a big part of improving the perception of procurement.
Absolutely. I think the only thing I will add is that this agentic AI is actually now taking it to the next level, where I think the user delight, user perceptions, stakeholder satisfaction is going to the next level because of, as you said, guided buying being far more robust, orchestration becoming really powerful function, and so many of those agentic approaches to users' requirement, and making it really simple to deal with procurement or just simply buy something, right? So that's one area I think it's still evolving, but will be actually a game changer.
How have you? We talked a little bit about the fear of change. What are some of the practices that you're seeing? Procurement leaders who are being successful in the implementation of generative AI, what are they doing to bring their team along for the ride?
Yeah, that's another great one, and I think we have kind of this comes up so commonly, especially when the CPOs are trying to drive this change. And one big thing we have seen is that if you start engaging the relevant teams upfront and communicate the objective of it, as well as engage them in building of POCs, pilots, or even the design phase, I think that goes a long way in just making them give the sense of ownership of this project or the GenAI implementation. So that's one big thing. Now, obviously, that has to be coupled with training, even the basic ones or the advancement, depending on the aptitude of people. So that's gone. That again, combined, these two things combined have gone a long way in easing the implementation and improving the adoption. Third is obviously, you've got to have that open communication that GenAI is not just the passing fad. It's here to stay. It's going to be central to the procurement strategy. It's going to drive lots and lots of change. So I think that reality has to sink in, and obviously people have to change that. The other thing is, obviously this technology is so revolutionary that just the existing team is not going to suffice, right? So at the CPO level, you have to make those changes and get in some fresh talent who understand the technology, who are kind of techno-functional experts, and get them into the team and augment the current team, not necessarily replace, but augment the current team. And then you will also have to go to an extent of creating some specific AI specific roles where they become the evangelist. They become, they work with the technology companies in implementation and all of that, so that it then eases the implementation and you hit the ROI pretty quickly. Those are some of the key things I think I have seen. Anything else to add?
I think just to jump on the comment that you talked about, engaging team members, making them core in project discussions and proof of concepts. I talked with a CPO last week who shared with me that they had set up what they called AI pods within their team, and what an AI pod really was, as a small number of their and this was a relatively small team, so it's not a huge big team that has lots of resources. Relatively small procurement team, but just created what they called a pod of folks within the team who are particularly curious about AI, and just made it as a side project, if you will, for the folks in the pod, but really empowered them to go and investigate the potential opportunities of AI, what's out there, How could we bring this into
Hmm.
practice, and then evangelize the use of the AI within their
Yeah.
colleagues. And I thought it was just a really interesting way of embracing and bringing people along for the ride. Now, the AI pods were not necessarily the ultimate decision makers, but they had a lot of influence within the organization. It became kind
Yeah.
of an informal AI CO, center of excellence, if you will, within the procurement team. And I thought that that was a really nice idea. Um, Something that I just wanted to say is that we interviewed the author of a survey in December from AI at Wharton, and what Wharton's findings were, is that right now there's this moment of time where middle management and the middle layers of management have an awful lot of influence right now in selecting AI initiatives. We're
Yeah.
kind of in this time where there's not necessarily a lot of corporate direction, and a lot of it is based on, well, where am I struggling in my day-to-day work that I need more. So you're kind of in that, if you're not at the CPO level, you're kind of a little bit below the CPO level. You've got a lot of influence right now in how to think of and use AI, and I would
Right.
encourage you to really lean into that and be one of the catalysts, for driving AI usage, as opposed to waiting for it to be, waiting to be told how it's going to impact you and impact your job.
True. True. But just to build on that, also, Phil, I think also, again, it depends on the corporate culture you have, but it's also important to have a corporate AI
Yeah,
strategy, at least a
yeah,
policy, and then drive some of the ground rules in terms of Gen AI, in terms of, okay, how's going to be security policy? What audits are you going to do? That kind of alleviates some of the fears, because lack of policy and structure kind of creates lots of fear in terms of data security concerns, and then there's a confusion in terms of who's the owner of that, what technologies do you want to assess, and stuff like that. So I think that's important too. While you want to leave the individual solution decisions to the
hmm
functions, there has to be an
yeah,
overarching policy and strategy in terms of uh, AI in broader sense, but Gen AI in particular, because there's just so much of a leakage that can happen, and we've got lots of examples of that
yeah.
happening. So
Well, I know that
that's what
I
I
know that
felt.
we only got a minute or two left here, so let's look into our crystal balls. Um, uh,
Yeah.
Somewhat difficult because of the pace of change right now, but where's the next 3 to 5 years taking us, in your opinion, when it comes to embracing and the impact of generative AI on procurement?
Yeah. So I'll start, and I think I know you've got the rich
Yeah,
experience in this space. So I'm going to hand it over to you as well. So I think one or two things. One is this whole evolving phase of AI slash Gen AI will actually now start to mature. I think as CPOs start thinking their 3 to 5 year
mhm,
strategy, I think Gen AI and agentic AI will become
yeah,
core to their overall
yeah,
strategy. It has to. I don't think there is any way about it. Um, Lots and lots of tactical and interaction related work will quickly get
yeah,
automated, if not
yeah,
already. And I think there'll be that much more focus on strategic
mhm,
work, especially the supply market assessment. And there are, other thing is, procurement has always been bogged down with so much of execution, that while everybody knows that there are lots of strategic things in terms of, okay, gathering good market intelligence, doing robust spend analysis, thinking about the categories, like, thinking strategically about the categories, the things they were not
yeah,
able to do, I think, almost like, as you said, almost like some of the things that outsourcing enabled them to do in a little bit sense, this will kind of revolutionize that. So I think the overall org will also start to look
yeah,
very different. There will be strong technology bend or slant to the overall
mhm,
team. There will be some specific technology resources in that. Everybody probably will have to have some ground level understanding of it. So those are some of the changes I'm thinking. And other thing, I'm just to close up my comment is, you start to get you start to be able to measure business outcomes far more clearly, and that's why you can start to tie both yourself and your team as well as the
yeah.
suppliers specific to the business outcome, because that there's just that much of wealth of information and data available.
Yeah, I think about how the operating model is going to evolve. I think that we kind of go on this cycle from decentralized to centralized to center-led where we are to kind of the next iteration of that is something that's a lot more business-centric. What I mean is almost kind of going back to decentralized, but with a lot of kind of invisible procurement guardrails in the background where most of the buying is devolved back into the business. And that buying can be very heavily automated or supported by generative AI, but it's just not spend that is necessarily worried about as long as it follows some certain rules which are kind of embedded into the process. I think the teams will get smaller in procurement. My hope is and has always been that we can actually increase our value proposition, which then makes procurement more attractive to a wider range of companies so that the net impact on procurement as a profession isn't necessarily that we get smaller, but teams within individual companies will likely get smaller. I think you have a core team of relational experts. So those are the ones that are a little bit agnostic in terms of category knowledge. And actually you'll get a more focus on center of excellences just to do the things you talked about, the kind of skills that you talked about. I think will all kind of be housed in a procurement center of excellence. Subject matter experts, I think will end up kind of dipping more into external pools of subject matter expertise when it's needed to augment kind of all the information that we have, the capabilities of the generative AI, and when the relational experts need to bring in some expertise on categories. So that'll be more of a pool that's externally driven, that's brought in rather than building huge big teams internally of those folks. And as I said before, I think that I just encourage everyone to experiment, because we don't necessarily know how long this change is going to take, but we know that the direction of travel is set. We know that teams are expected to do more with less, and the current operating model just isn't sustainable for that. We know that that investment in procurement is coming more in the form of technology than people, and I don't expect that to change.
Right.
So that's what I would just encourage folks to think about, and that's where I would look at where procurement will go in the next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely. Hey, I mean, this is a topic where we could kind of spend the whole day talking about, but I think we are, I guess we are out of time. So thank you so much,
Thank
Philip.
you.
I think it was great talking about this exciting space of AI, Gen AI, and agentic AI. Audience, we hope you gain valuable insights on the opportunities and challenges for AI adoption. And again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box. And then if you would like to learn more, you can scan the QR code on the screen and get access to all our insights.